"I'm sorry, sir, but you can't live here." That's what the HOA president said as I stood on my own front porch, keys in one hand, my wife's ashes in the other. At first, I thought I'd misheard him. Maybe it was the buzzing from the long drive, the roar of the highway still humming in my skull. Maybe it was the way the porch light flickered above us, throwing his shadow long and crooked across the welcome home mat I'd bought on clearance. But he said it again, slower. "You can't live here." Behind him, a police cruiser idled at the curb, engine low, like it was waiting for a signal. Two officers watched me over their dash, hands resting casually near their radios. Like I was a problem. Like I was already halfway to being a suspect. I remember looking down at the keys in my hand. They left little crescent marks in my palm from how hard I was squeezing them. The moving truck behind me beeped as the driver shifted into park. My whole life was in that truck. Everything I had left, everything that survived the hospital, the funeral, the storage unit. "You must be joking," I said. He wasn't. You know that feeling when your life has already fallen apart once, and then someone walks in and calmly tells you they're about to dismantle whatever you've rebuilt? That was this moment. And if you think I overreacted later, if you think I should have just stayed calm, I want you to remember this scene. Me, my dead wife's ashes, my first home, and an HOA board that had already decided I did not belong there. What would you have done if you were me? 3 months earlier, I was sleeping in the back of my car. Technically, it was taking naps between shifts, like I told my coworkers, but we all knew what that really meant. There's a particular stiffness you get from sleeping in the front seat versus the back, and there's a special kind of shame in pretending you've got a place to go when your place is the employee parking lot behind the hospital. My name's Daniel. I'm a respiratory therapist. Most people don't know what that is until they can't breathe. Then they look at you like you're the only person in the world who matters. I used to love that. That focus, that urgency, that purpose. Then COVID came and we all stopped feeling like heroes and started feeling like disposable parts. My wife, Hannah, didn't live long enough to see that shift completely. Or maybe she saw it before I did. She was a nurse on the same floor. We used to pass each other in the hallway, share a look above our masks, and pretend we'd talk at home. But home turned into her parents' house when she got sick too. I'm not going to go into all of that yet, not in detail. Just know this. When she died, the hospital felt like a haunted building with fluorescent lights. Every hallway, every supply closet, every chair in the break room had a version of her sitting in it that only I could see. So I left. Not the profession. I couldn't afford that. I transferred hospitals, changed cities, packed what little we had into a storage unit, and told myself this was a fresh start. You ever try to outdrive grief? It rides shotgun. Buckled in. Doesn't even bother with a seatbelt sometimes. It just floats there beside you and watches. The plan was simple. I'd save every spare dollar from my shifts. I'd live cheap, sleeping in my car when I had to, couch surfing when I got lucky. I ate a lot of vending machine dinners and whatever shift leftovers the nurses didn't take. I showered in the hospital locker room, telling myself I was just being efficient. And then, when I had enough, I'd buy a modest home. Something small. Just mine. Something I could walk into and close the door and feel, for the first time since Hannah's diagnosis, like I wasn't in someone else's space. I had one non-negotiable. If I buy a house, I told myself, Hannah comes with me. Not literally. I'm not that far gone. But her ashes, the small urn I kept in the storage unit, would sit on a mantel somewhere. A quiet corner. A place where the light could hit it in the afternoon. A place that felt like we made it. That I got us there even if she never stepped foot inside. That's how I met Maple Ridge Estates. That's what the development called itself. The name sounded friendlier than it looked in person. It wasn't one of those massive luxury communities, more like a slightly aging suburb with ambitions. But it had trees. Real, tall, old trees that lined the sidewalks and dropped enough leaves to hide the cracks in the pavement. Kids' bikes were left on lawns. A basketball hoop leaned slightly to one side in a driveway. There were solar lights edging the flower beds of almost every house, and the air smelled like someone always had a barbecue going somewhere. I remember scrolling through the listing photos at 2 a.m. on my phone in the hospital break room. My eyes burned from the screen's brightness and a 12-hour shift. My hand still smelled like alcohol wipes and latex. There it was. A small, 2-story townhome on a corner of the cul-de-sac. Beige siding. White trim. A faintly crooked mailbox. The listing said recently updated, which meant someone had put in fake wood vinyl floors and stainless appliances from 3 Black Fridays ago. But there was a little balcony off the main bedroom, a slice of rail under a piece of sky. I imagined putting a chair out there, a small table, maybe a plant I'd forget to water. I imagined waking up and opening the sliding door and saying, "Good morning, Han," to nobody. 4 weeks later, it appraised. 5 weeks later, my loan went through. I signed my name so many times my hand cramped. Nobody congratulates you when you close on a place alone. The title agent slid the last paper across the table and gave me a practiced smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Ellis. You're officially a homeowner." I wanted to say, "We're homeowners," but I just nodded. The first time I drove into Maple Ridge as a resident, sunlight was bouncing off a row of SUVs. I followed the navigation even though I'd memorized the route. It was ritual by then. The same turn off the main road, the same slow roll past the Maple Ridge Estates, a deed-restricted community sign. That sign didn't mean much to me. I'd never had an HOA before. Growing up, my parents rented. Then I moved from apartment to apartment, then to the hospital floors. Deed restricted sounded official, like it applied to other people. I was focused on my address, on watching the house appear between the lines of trees as I rounded the corner. There it was. My house. A for sale sign still leaned against the garage wall. The previous owner's faded wind chimes tapped little metallic notes in the breeze. The porch light was on, even though it was daytime. It probably had one of those sensors that never got adjusted. I pulled the car to the curb and just sat there for a minute, hands on the steering wheel, engine ticking. The smell of fast food coffee filled the cabin. My heartbeat tapped against the inside of my chest like fingers against a table. I turned off the engine. Silence settled around me. Not hospital silence, not the hum of machines and distant cries. Real silence. Birdsong. A lawnmower somewhere in the distance. The low whoosh of a car passing the development entrance. I stepped out into it and closed the door. The air smelled like wet grass and someone's laundry detergent. I walked up the path to the front door, the keys heavy in my pocket like they'd gained weight since the title office. I slid my hand along the railing, feeling the flaking paint under my palm. And then I stopped. In the front window, barely visible through the glare, was a small piece of paper taped to the inside glass. At first, I thought it was something the previous owners had left. A welcome note, maybe, or some instructions for the thermostat like the real estate agent said they might. I leaned closer. The paper had big block letters printed across it. Below it, smaller text I couldn't make out through the glare. My stomach did a slow, uneasy roll, but I forced myself to exhale. It's probably about them, I thought. Something they didn't fix. Something that'll just go away. I slid the key into the lock. It stuck for a second, then turned with a dry, reluctant click. I pushed the door open. The house smelled like old carpet cleaner and faint cigarette smoke. the kind of smell that lingers long after the curtains are gone. The living room was empty, echoing. My footsteps sounded too loud as I stepped inside. I grabbed the paper from the window. It crinkled between my fingers. The date at the top was 2 weeks ago. Unauthorized vehicle, it read. Parking in violation of HOA regulations. Non-compliant exterior modifications. Contact HOA office immediately. At the bottom, printed neatly, was a name. Grant Miller, HOA President. I remember saying it out loud just to hear how it felt in my mouth. Grant Miller. It tasted like something burnt. I didn't think much of it after that. That was my first mistake. I tossed the notice onto the kitchen counter, opened cabinets, flushed toilets, ran the shower. I did all the weird, practical things you do when you first walk into a house you own. Check water pressure. Flip light switches. Open the fridge and pretend the emptiness inside doesn't match the emptiness in your chest. Later that evening, I drove to the storage unit. The sun was low by the time I rolled up the metal door, the concrete throwing back heat at my legs. The urn sat on the top shelf toward the back. It was smaller than I remembered. White with a simple silver band around it. No angel statues. No floral patterns. Hannah would have hated anything too ornate. I picked it up gently, like it was still fragile, like I could still hurt her if I wasn't careful. My throat tightened. "We're going home," I whispered. I wrapped the urn in a towel and placed it in the passenger seat for the drive back. It felt wrong to put her in the trunk. Wrong to have a box of kitchen utensils beside her. The sky darkened as I drove. The streetlights on the main road flickered on one by one, like they were following me. I turned into Maple Ridge again, that big HOA sign watching me. There were more cars parked along the street now. People outside watering lawns, bringing in trash bins, walking dogs that barked at my car as I passed. This time, as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a man across the cul-de-sac watching me. He was in his 50s, maybe. Gray at the temples, polo shirt tucked into khaki shorts. He had that way of standing with his hands clasped behind his back, like a principal waiting for a student who'd just broken a rule they didn't know existed. He didn't wave, he just watched. I killed the engine and sat for a second, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on the urn. The man turned and walked back up his driveway, disappearing into a house with a perfectly trimmed hedge and a small metal sign that read, "This property protected by video surveillance." I exhaled slowly. "I guess that's the neighborhood welcome committee," I muttered. I took the urn inside first. I didn't have furniture yet, just a couple of camp chairs and an air mattress in the trunk. So I put Hannah on the kitchen counter, right in the middle, where you'd put a fruit bowl or stack of mail. I stood there for a long moment, looking at it. At her. "This is it," I said, "new start." Outside, somewhere close, a dog barked. A car door slammed. Someone laughed. Inside, my voice echoed off empty walls. I didn't know it yet, but that was the calm before it all began. Before the first letter, before the fines, before the meetings and the humiliation and the night I'd stand on my own porch, keys in one hand, her in the other, and be told I was trespassing on my own property. That all started the next morning, when the HOA president knocked on my door. The knock came at 7:12 a.m. Not the polite kind of knock, not the welcome to the neighborhood kind. This was a 3-hit, knuckles to wood, open up now sort of knock, the kind that snaps you awake before your brain catches up. I'd slept on the floor, my air mattress wasn't inflated yet, and my spine protested as I pushed myself upright. My shirt was wrinkled and stuck to my chest. The house was cold, empty, still learning the shape of me. The knocking came again. "Yeah, okay," I muttered, rubbing my eyes. "I'm coming." When I opened the door, the man from across the cul-de-sac stood there. Up close, he looked even more like someone who alphabetizes their spice cabinet, and straightens the boxes on grocery shelves that aren't even theirs. His polo was tucked in so tightly it created horizontal tension lines across his stomach. He held a clipboard. Of course he did. "Good morning," he said, though he didn't sound like he meant it. "I'm Grant Miller, HOA president." So, this was him. The name from the violation notice. The man behind everything I didn't yet realize was coming. I nodded. "Yeah, Daniel Ellis." His eyes drifted past me into the house, scanning the empty living room like he was already checking for infractions. "So, Mr. Ellis, you moved in yesterday?" "Officially, yeah." He tapped his pen against his clipboard. "You were supposed to complete the new resident orientation packet before occupying the property." "Orientation?" I blinked. "Like, a meeting?" "It's mandatory," he said. "We take compliance very seriously here at Maple Ridge Estates." I wanted to laugh, mostly because I was tired, unshowered, and talking to a man whose socks probably had labels for which foot they belonged on. But something in his face told me laughter would be a mistake. "I didn't get any orientation packet," I said. "Nobody told me." He lifted a hand, cutting me off. "No matter, we'll schedule one." He wrote something so quickly on the clipboard I didn't see his pen move. Behind him, a woman walked her golden retriever past my driveway. She offered a small smile, the kind people give when they witness tension but want to pretend everything's fine. Grant didn't acknowledge her. Didn't even glance. "What I am here about," he continued, "is the violation on file." "The one taped to my window?" "Yes." His jaw tightened. "There's an unresolved issue with the previous owners regarding an unauthorized vehicle and exterior modifications. Until those are corrected and approved, the property remains in violation." I rubbed the back of my neck. "But I just moved in. I literally got the keys yesterday. Isn't that something that resets with ownership?" "No." His tone sharpened. "Violations remain with the property, not the owner. That's clearly stated in the CC and RS." "The what?" "Covenants, conditions, and restrictions," he recited, like he was naming the Holy Trinity. I exhaled slowly. "Okay, well, can you tell me what the issue is? What needs fixing?" "There's a list." He flipped the clipboard around. I scanned down the lines. Unauthorized vehicle, fence panel non-compliant, exterior paint shade off regulation, planting beds unmaintained, satellite dish improperly mounted, improper trash can, placement trash cans. Yes. Trash cans made the list. I stared at it. "This is from the previous owners, right? All of this?" He nodded once. "Correct. And you're telling me the house is out of compliance before I even moved in?" "That's correct." "And I have to fix all of this?" "Yes, within 14 days. I laughed then, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. "Sir, I just bought this place. I haven't even unpacked a toothbrush yet." He didn't blink. Compliance isn't optional. Something cold settled in my stomach. "Okay," I said slowly. "What happens if I don't fix it by your deadline?" His lips made a thin, satisfied line. "Fines, daily." I crossed my arms. "Daily?" "Yes, they accrue quickly." "A threat on day one?" I asked. "Really?" "It's not a threat," he said. "It's policy." He tore a pink sheet from his clipboard and handed it to me. "This is your official copy. Additional notices will follow." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "And, Mr. Ellis, as a reminder, residents must maintain a clean exterior appearance. Maple Ridge Estates values order." Order. He said it like a warning, like he'd memorized the word and practiced saying it in the mirror. Grant turned and walked down my driveway with the deliberate posture of a man who believed he upheld civilization itself. As he stepped off my curb, he glanced back at my car. "You'll also need to register your vehicle by Friday." "It's Tuesday." "Correct." He continued walking. I closed the door slowly, the weight of the conversation pressing down on my chest. I didn't know it yet, not fully, but this was just the first soft knock of a sledgehammer that would eventually hit me square in the ribs. I set the violation notice on the kitchen counter next to Hannah's urn. "Welcome home, I guess," I muttered. I swear the urn seemed to tilt a little, like even she was judging the situation. That day was a blur of unpacking and trying not to think too hard about what Grant had said. I kept telling myself, it's paperwork, bureaucracy. Annoying, but manageable. I was wrong. Around noon, I stepped outside to grab something from my car. The sun was warm on my shoulders. A few neighbors were gardening, watering, trimming hedges. Everyone seemed busy. I popped the trunk and dug through a box looking for my toolbox. "Afternoon," the voice came from my right. A woman in her 60s walked toward me from the sidewalk. She wore a wide-brimmed sun hat, gardening gloves, and an apron with faded strawberry prints. Her smile reached her eyes in a way that felt genuinely warm. "Afternoon," I said, matching her tone. "I'm Maria," she said. "I live 2 houses down, blue shutters. Wanted to say welcome." I exhaled in relief. "Thanks. I'm Daniel. Just moved in yesterday." "I know," she said with a soft laugh. "This neighborhood notices everything." I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I'm beginning to get that impression." Her smile dimmed slightly, like she was trying to decide whether to say something. "You met Grant yet?" she asked. I let out a dry breath. "This morning." "Ah," she winced. "That explains the expression on your face." I chuckled. "Is he always like that?" "Grant?" She looked around, then leaned closer. "Grant was born like that," I snorted. "Good to know." "Don't let him scare you," she said, though her tone suggested she didn't fully believe that. "He's strict, very strict. But if you follow the rules, he eventually loses interest." "What happens if you don't?" I asked. She hesitated. "People don't usually test that. Not for long." The unease in my stomach grew. "Well," she added quickly, trying to shift the mood, "if you ever need anything, I'm usually gardening, or baking, or avoiding HOA meetings. That counts as a hobby, right?" I smiled. "Absolutely." She waved and continued down the sidewalk with her little basket of tools. The moment she was gone, I noticed something. Across the street, half hidden behind a living room curtain, someone was watching me. A pale sliver of a face, a flash of movement as the curtain fell back into place when they realized I'd spotted them. I looked away, pretending not to care. But here's the thing about being in a hospital environment for years. You learn to read people, even the ones you barely see. And there was something about that curtain watcher that made the hair on my arms rise. This neighborhood was not what it looked like. That night, I got my first letter. Not the violation notice, not the orientation packet. A different letter. No envelope. Just a folded sheet of paper slid under my door sometime before dawn. I found it when I stepped into the hallway. The handwriting was small and tight, like someone afraid of being recognized. "Be careful. He's watching everything you do." Just one sentence. No signature. No explanation. My heart thudded once, heavy. I looked through the peephole. The street was empty. Still. Silent. I checked the doorbell camera. Nothing. Someone had walked right up to my house, my first night living there, and left a warning. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of the unraveling. The moment tensions stopped being annoying neighbor stuff and started becoming something darker, something targeted. And soon, it wouldn't just be letters. It would be fines, then threats, then police, and eventually, the moment I'd stand on my own porch, gripping my keys like a lifeline, while officers told me I was trespassing on property I legally owned. But the first sign was that note. A single sentence. Be careful. He's watching everything you do. And by the end of that week, I would understand exactly what they meant. I didn't tell anyone about the note. What was I supposed to say? Hey, someone left me a creepy warning about the HOA president watching me? The more I thought about it, the crazier it sounded. And truthfully, I was still trying to figure out how to deal with the other violations. I'd set up a meeting with Grant, sure, but each time I thought about it, the more I felt like I was walking into a trap. I spent the next few days in a haze of moving boxes and cleaning, taking stock of the things I still had left to unpack. The house felt more like a house now. I had a bed, a few chairs, a coffee table. Little things that made it feel less empty. But the ghosts of the house were still there. The things Grant had said, the feeling of being watched, of not belonging. I couldn't shake it. I tried to ignore the sense of unease that kept creeping in every time I stepped out of the door, but every time I did, I noticed more eyes. People on their porches, in their windows, watching. It wasn't paranoia. It was a feeling, a kind of slow burn of scrutiny that sat in my chest. And Grant wasn't backing off. Every day I received new violation notices, not one, not two, 3. I went from being in violation of 1 or 2 things to 6. The letter slid under my door, the violation report, and I saw that everything I'd fixed, or thought I had been ignored. The mailbox was misaligned, my front lawn was not up to standard, the exterior trim was peeling, everything was wrong. Daniel? The voice cut through the fog of my exhaustion as I stood in the driveway. I hadn't been sleeping well. I kept hearing things late at night, like someone walking around outside or tapping at the windows. It wasn't that I thought it was a ghost. I knew it wasn't. But the paranoia was real. I looked up. Standing in front of me was a man in his late 30s. Casual clothes. T-shirt, jeans, worn sneakers. He was holding a piece of paper, looking at it like he was deciding how to present it. Can I help you? I asked. I'm Ryan, he said, 2 doors down. I saw you were, having some trouble with the HOA. His voice was low, almost like he was worried someone would overhear him. There was something almost apologetic about the way he spoke, like he knew he was about to offer something controversial. I nodded slowly, crossing my arms. Yeah, you could say that. Just moved in, and they're coming at me with everything. I was tired of pretending this was just a small issue. Ryan hesitated for a moment, glancing at the street behind us, making sure nobody else was watching before he stepped closer. Grant Miller, right? I stiffened. Yeah, I know. He's been difficult. Ryan's eyes dropped to the ground for a moment before looking up again. Listen, I don't want to get you in trouble, but a few of us in the neighborhood, we've been dealing with him for a while now. I raised an eyebrow. Dealing with him? Ryan let out a low, frustrated breath. He's got a personal vendetta against some of the homeowners here. It's not just you, Daniel. It's been a lot of people. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's bad. Real bad. And nobody has the guts to stand up to him. The HOA's got way too much power here. I felt my stomach drop. So, what? This isn't just about the rules. No, Ryan said, shaking his head. It's not just about rules. It's about control. He's trying to run this place like it's his kingdom. I swallowed, trying to process what he was saying. But why would he target me? I'm just the new guy. Ryan sighed. Doesn't matter. He doesn't care if you've been here a day or a decade. He's got a plan for everyone. He's going to find something on every single person who lives here. And once he does, it's fines, threats, you name it. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. This wasn't how I'd imagined the first months of my new life here would go. I didn't even know who to trust anymore. What do? I asked, already knowing how desperate I sounded. Ryan shifted his weight, looking over his shoulder again. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice even more. Get a lawyer. And don't give him an inch. He can't keep pushing if you don't let him. Before I could ask anything else, he turned and walked away. Just like that, disappearing into his house. The street was quiet again. Almost too quiet. I didn't have a lawyer. Hell, I didn't even know where to begin with something like that. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was no longer just a problem for me. This was a problem for the entire neighborhood. And maybe if I started asking questions, maybe if I started digging, I could find out what Grant Miller's endgame was. What kind of leverage he had over everyone. I wasn't going to wait around and let him destroy me. Not without a fight. A few hours later, I was on the phone with the legal department of a local housing advocacy group. Yes, sir. We've dealt with cases like this before, the woman on the other end of the line said. The key thing to remember here is that the HOA doesn't have absolute power. They cannot just change the rules midway or apply them retroactively. You have a legal right to fight any fines or violations they try to enforce. I felt a small spark of hope. It was so faint, so fragile, but it was there. But, she added, the real issue is the ongoing harassment. If this continues, it's not just about fines anymore. This is bullying, and we have to treat it as such. Bullying. Harassment. I hadn't seen it that way before, but now I could. It was clear as day. Grant Miller wasn't just playing by the rules, he was breaking them, and I had the right to stand up for myself. And maybe, just maybe, I could rally the rest of the neighborhood to do the same. But then I heard something in the distance. It was faint at first, but it grew louder. A siren. Then another, and another. My heart dropped. I looked out the window just as 2 police cruisers pulled up to my driveway. My driveway, my house. I stared at the squad cars, the flashing lights bouncing off the windows. What the hell was happening? I stepped outside, heart pounding in my chest. Grant Miller was standing on my porch, and the police were here to back him up. I walked toward the officers, trying to force my legs to move, but they felt like they were stuck in cement. Grant gave me a smug look as he held out a small piece of paper. I tried to handle this the nice way, Daniel, he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. But now it's out of my hands. The officer looked at me, his gaze unreadable. Sir, we've been called to respond to an alleged trespassing incident. Do you have identification on you? Trespassing? On my own property? I looked back at Grant, who stood there, arms crossed, eyes cold. A feeling of dread crawled down my spine. What's going on? I asked. The officer stepped forward. We're just following up, sir. We need to make sure you're not violating any orders. I was going to lose my house, my home. I realized that this was no longer about fines or violations. This was about control. And Grant Miller wasn't going to stop until I had nothing left. The police didn't arrest me that day, but they didn't leave either. I stood on the edge of the driveway, numb. I couldn't focus on anything except the flashing lights, the words hanging in the air, the reality of what was happening. Grant Miller, standing there smug as ever, gave me a final look before he turned and walked away, back to his car. The officers followed him with their eyes but said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had control. That's what it felt like. They were just doing what they were told. Like puppets on strings. I stood there looking at my own property, the house I had sacrificed everything to own. The house I'd poured every ounce of myself into, my blood, my sweat, my tears. And now it was a prison. It wasn't just the violations anymore. It wasn't just the fines or the paperwork. It was the feeling of being hunted, of being cornered in my own home. I watched the officers drive off, sirens still ringing in my ears. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, lawyers, phone calls, Meetings. More meetings. Emails that sounded like they were written in another language. All while I was being dragged deeper into Grant's web of power and control. The lawyer I hired confirmed what I had started to fear. Grant had something over the entire neighborhood. It wasn't just about the rules. It was about the power he wielded, the influence he had over everyone. People were afraid of him. I was afraid of him. Even the police, I realized, were just following orders, and that was the breaking point. One night, sitting alone in the house, staring at the ceiling of the dark living room, I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for my home anymore. I wasn't fighting to survive some bureaucratic nightmare. I was fighting for my own sanity, my dignity. I was fighting against a system that was crushing me under the weight of its regulations and its indifference. I needed to stop playing by his rules. I needed to take back control. I needed to fight in a way I'd never done before. I wasn't going to let Grant Miller take everything from me. The following day, I started collecting stories. It wasn't enough to fight this alone. It wasn't just my voice that needed to be heard. It was the voices of everyone he'd crushed beneath his heel. Every neighbor who was too scared to speak out. Every homeowner who had faced the same harassment and intimidation but had stayed silent out of fear of what would happen next. Ryan had told me the truth. I wasn't the only one. The more I listened, the more I realized how widespread the issue was. People had been afraid of speaking up, afraid of losing their homes, afraid of the man who held the HOA leash. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I went door to door. I sat with people, I listened, and little by little, I built an army, a quiet rebellion of homeowners who were ready to fight back, ready to take the HOA to court. It wasn't just the fines anymore. It wasn't just about Grant Miller's petty power games. It was about standing up to something much bigger. It was about showing the world that you didn't have to roll over and accept injustice. Every time I spoke to a neighbor, I could feel the weight lifting off my chest. I wasn't alone anymore. We weren't alone, and together, we would fight back. The community started to come together. People who had kept their heads down for years suddenly found their voices. People who had been afraid to make waves began calling the HOA out for its tactics. Grant had underestimated us. The day we filed the lawsuit was the day I finally felt like I had my life back. It was messy, it was ugly, and it took longer than I ever expected. But when we finally stood in that courtroom, side by side with our lawyers, our voices unified in one purpose, I knew that we were going to win. It was never just about the house. It was about more than that. It was about proving that a few corrupt people couldn't crush you. They couldn't win because they had a title or a clipboard or a fancy position. We had something they didn't: unity. When the judge ruled in our favor, declaring that the HOA's harassment had crossed a line, I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for everyone in that courtroom, everyone in the neighborhood who had fought back. Grant Miller's grip was broken. The final settlement wasn't perfect. The HOA had to pay fines for their misconduct. But the best part? They were forced to restructure. New leadership, clearer rules, an independent auditor to review their practices. The changes came slowly, but they came. And that's when I realized the transformation wasn't just about me getting my home back. It was about the community, about how we had fought for something greater than ourselves. I remember the first time I walked out to my porch after everything was over. The sun was setting. There were no more fines, no more violations. The air smelled different now, fresher, cleaner. The street was quiet, peaceful. People were sitting on their porches, talking, laughing, living, the way it should have been all along. I stood there, looking out across the neighborhood. I had gotten my house back, yes, but it was more than that. I'd gotten myself back. And even though the house was no longer just a place to hide from my grief, it had become something more. It had become a symbol of resilience. I didn't expect everything to be perfect after that. Nothing is. But I had learned something through it all. Justice isn't just about winning, it's about standing up. It's about finding the courage to take on the giants, even when you're standing alone. And it's about realizing that even in the darkest moments, you don't have to be afraid to fight back. As for Grant Miller, I didn't see him around much after the trial. But every time I hear someone talk about him, or the HOA, I remember how we came together. How the fight for my house turned into a fight for all of us. And in the end, that's what made the difference. I still live in that house today. The urn is still on the mantel. A small part of her is here, in the place we called home. I've never stopped fighting for what's right, for myself, for my family, and for everyone who deserves to live in a place that isn't ruled by fear. I guess that's what justice means to me.